Hello and welcome to this episode of Cinematography Database Show. In this episode, we're going to be breaking down the cinematography of The Jungle Book. And just so that you know, this is going to be a tech breakdown. So we're going to be looking at behind the scenes photos. We're going to be talking about what it was like to actually be on set. And we're going to be looking at what Bill Pope, the cinematographer, did to make this movie a reality. Now, it was of course a team effort, but this is a cinematography focused show, but we're going to be talking about how Bill Pope worked in this very modern virtual production is the appropriate term for this, and how he worked with the previs team, the virtual production team, the visual effects team to make The Jungle Book the amazing movie that it really is. So we are going to be digging real deep into that sort of stuff right after this intro. Okay, Jungle Book lovers, we are going straight to IMDb with proper branding. You basically are not a real movie if you don't have this amazing artwork around your movie, or you're an old movie. I guess you're not a real modern movie. So The Jungle Book, very cool. Just by looking at this already, we're seeing that it's in 3D. It's a Disney film, and clearly there's a lot of computer-generated animals and scenery. And by a lot, I mean, I would say 95% of the film. Now, for the traditional filmmakers, which is probably the majority of us, I don't want you to look at animated movies like this and say that, and just be like, oh, it's CG, it's not cinematography, like blah, 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 I'm not paying attention. Where this is going, where we're going as cinematographers, especially in the feature film industry, is towards this. We're just running towards it. So if you're interested in having your career in the feature film industry or commercial industry, or really just being a cinematographer in the next like 10, 20 years and beyond, that sort of thing, you should definitely pay attention to what this is, this trend. It's not a trend. This is just how things are moving. We used to ride horses, but now we drive cars. There are still some people that like to ride horses, but it's just for fun. It's really expensive. Most of us are driving, and then driving is going to go to the robots pretty soon. I am going to take us all the way down. They really hide the cinematographer credit in this. Directed by Jon Favreau. Cinematography by Bill Pope. Sponsored by McDonald's and Angry Birds. Bill Pope shot The Matrix. So basically one of my favorite movies of all time. Spider-Man, whole bunch of stuff. So he's Men in Black. He is no stranger to the visual effects feature film. But as we'll see in a second, even he was not comfortable with how modern this really was, this workflow. So I'm going to close this one. Here are some of the articles that I used as research for this movie. I didn't get to interview Bill, and I was working on an interview with the virtual production team for Jungle Book, but it just wasn't working out with Disney, getting approvals and that sort of thing. As soon as you work on big movies like this, it's harder to line that stuff up. But anyway, this is the ICG, International Cinematographers Guild interview with Bill Pope. And they give an amazingly detailed overview of the production pipeline of a film like this. A lot of interesting behind-the-scenes stuff. Go check it out. I'm going to be paraphrasing comments and overviews from this. On top of that, I'm also looking at Mike Seymour's, who's a friend of mine from FX Guide and FX PhD, where I actually taught a course on previs in Maya at FX PhD, his platform, his teaching platform. They do a very good job, or Mike does a very good job of rounding up all the information relevant to the visual effects artists and community, and I read that as well. And it's very much the combination, this film, of live action and virtual. Despite the execution in the final image being primarily CG, they went out of their way, the visual effects producer, John Legato, I believe, basically went way out of his way to make sure that this felt real. Rob Legato, I'm sorry. Sorry, Rob, you're a genius, and I'm an idiot for not knowing your name. They went out of their way to make sure that Bill and Jon Favreau, so that's why I was saying John, because of the director, both were able to use their real-world filmmaking sensibilities and have that translated into CG. So when you watch the movie, there's a lot of camera movement, there's a lot of lighting, there's a lot of blocking, there's a lot of humanness to the 3D execution, and that's really where we're going in the future. It's not looking at 3D as like kind of like early days where CG was really bad and boring and sterile and kind of like a disconnect from reality. Now we're really bringing the humanness to the computers, and that's where we're starting to see amazing breakout work like The Jungle Book. So let's hop right in. We're going to get into some tech stuff right now. So The Jungle Book. Jungle Book. Here's our slate picture. It's called Truce, I guess. That was the secret project name. Very cool Disney font. Bill Pope. Good stuff. Good stuff. So let's look really quickly at the overview of the pre-pro process for a movie like this. So clearly, they're not shooting in a desert. And John, the director, talks about it, and Bill talks about it in their interviews. And they said that when you're in the jungle, it's beautiful to eye. The jungle is this beautiful, lush place. It has all this production design built into it. But when you go to shoot it, it just looks like salad. And that's because it's very hard to get light through the canopy of trees. It's very hard to control a massive amount of forest. So they never wanted to make a movie that way. It's extremely difficult. It's very limiting, and on top of that, you have animals and child actors. It's a very tricky thing. It's not always going to be the best. It's not the way that they wanted to tell this story. So, with it being conceived from the beginning as being essentially a virtual film, a company called MPC, Motion Picture Company, spearheaded the concept design phases, which is where an artist will literally go in Photoshop, which is how I record these videos and mark them up. They will go and they will hand draw or use 3D and photos and hand draw and hand paint style frames like this. And they'll do this for the entire movie. Almost every shot, every scene, everything gets designed in the computer here from someone's imagination. So this is pure art. To not consider this cinematography is just foolish, just insanely foolish. And I'll fight you on that. You can fight. You want to leave me a comment if you're not into this. If this doesn't feel like cinematography to you, leave a comment with me. I'll fight you on it. It's cool. Internet fight, not real fight. You'd probably win the real fight. So after it gets concepted and drawn, this is going to be an abridged version. Of course, it's a little bit more complicated, but I'm going to try to get this in a quick way to you. Then they actually go and they wear the mocap suits. Okay, so we've all seen the suits with the little tracker balls. You can imagine as that person, as the real person moves, the virtual person moves, and they go and they act out the majority of the film. Not final animation. It's just to have some performance, some 3D to look at. And they start to roughly put together these 3D sets. Nothing final, no final filmmaking decisions. It's just to start to gather resources together. And they act out a bunch of the film, but it's not final previs, it's not final animation. It's just to start looking at something and to start the filmmaking process. This is well before any shooting happens. So for this motion capture, I wanted to shout out the people that were involved in this. So for motion capture, where you wear the suit, you do some motion, they capture that, and they bring that into the computer. That was done at a company called Animatrix. Animatrix? I don't know. This is a clip from their website. Go check them out. I think they're only in Canada, and I wanted to shout them out as well here. This is their website. Go check them out. That's where the motion capture happened for this film. Not in the States. Canada. So what's up next? What I wanted to bring up here, and they brought this up in, I think, the ICG article, was the virtual art department. So in the beginning of this process, and you'll see why this is important later, they actually have to go and start bringing in assets. So they'll go and 3D scan a tree, or they'll go 3D scan a rock, and 3D scan a lot of stuff, and they have to 3D model it. They're just trying to make a lot of assets that you would kind of have on the real set. They're basically going to bring those into the computer so that you can start to, the director and the DP can start to move them around. They basically make a virtual set that's like a video game. The director goes in it in virtual reality or with a headset or with like a controller, like a video game, and he goes in there and he finds angles. And then he can start to move things around. So it's basically like if you were like flying around New Zealand like Peter Jackson looking for locations, but virtually. And then you're like, I don't like how that mountain looks. Let's put it over there. That sort of stuff. People are actually doing this right now. And who are the people responsible for that? We're going to say right here. On this film, his name is Gary Roberts. And he is a virtual production supervisor at Digital Domain. And here is a picture of Gary from an article a while back. And he is controlling a... why can I not paint on you? You locked or something? Essentially, he's controlling a virtual camera with some mocap actors. And this is the Digital Domain, I think the old Zemeckis motion capture stage, though this is not where they did the motion capture for Jungle Book. So Gary Roberts, among many other things, his responsibility is to be the virtual art department. He's going to start to bring in all these virtual assets that they're going to use on set to preview what it's going to happen. And we're going to go over the on-set previs process, which is also called virtual production, but we can call it on-set previs for people that are still new to this concept in general. So what they also said that happened, which is beautiful in my opinion, is that after all these scenes were drawn first as a concept, storyboarded out, then they were the action of it, some very rough action for the most of the movie was done in 3D to make some characters move around so that they could start to look at the film from a big picture from above in 3D. Assets were brought in together, so for 3D stuff, 3D trees, 3D jungles, we're starting to put together very rough stuff, still just the asset part of the phase, building the library. At that point, Bill Pope and a 3D artist from the MPC got together and they lit digital forests together. They would go and they would light and find the blocking and some of the camera moves and just get like a rough first pass of what the lighting was supposed to look like for pretty much every scene. And it would look something like this, not exactly. And I believe they use RenderMan as their primary render engine, which I've not really used RenderMan. I'm more of an Arnold, and I kind of like Cinema 4D, Physical, and Octane. But RenderMan, it's obviously coming from a good place, Disney and Pixar. They would take a scene like this, and this is more like a final quality one, but they would go through and they would light the scene together. So the DP would use his lighting knowledge and he would work with the 3D artist who understands the 3D lighting, and together they would find the lighting of the scene. And this is well before production and before, before final photography. So picture that Bill and a 3D artist figured out the lighting for the scene. There's dappled light happening. It's really cool. It's coming from a great angle. What that does is that informs how to light the live action set. And we're going to talk a lot about this process. And then because it's been concepted by the DP and they've found the lighting first in 3D and then they bring it onto live action, they capture what they have to there, the final photography looks like this, and it all sticks together. It's not like some like flat bad lighting that like goes into an environment that no one ever knew that the two companies weren't talking to each other. Like that's the way a lot of bad green screen happens, is the DP doesn't know anything in pre-production about what's going to happen, and he definitely doesn't know anything about the final render. In this case, the DP was brought in early enough that he was actually directing the lighting, so directing a virtual lighting set, and then that informs the on-set stuff, and that of course helps you believe that this is actually real. Now, when I watch Jungle Book and scenes from it, it feels real to me. I know that there's some parts that are like probably more CG feeling than others, but in general, it's an amazing achievement, and I just start to buy it. So that's a bit of the pre-pro process. On set, you'll see them. This is like kind of a meeting before the actual shoot or maybe during it. Lots of computers on set. Get ready. This is going to start happening a lot. They're looking at the previs first. They're like, okay, guys, this is the shot that we're going to be going for today. Here's what's real. Here are the lines. And you get to watch a preview before you go to the execution. So that's really nice because everyone needs to really know what's going on. And this is something that I'm obviously 100% for, is having nice 3D representations of sets before you get there. Here's our director directing our Mowgli talent here, and he's showing him. He's like, these are concept drawings and some photos that basically he's showing him like what the backgrounds are going to be to give us some context to what's actually going to be happening. So let's look at the pre-pro process. It's pretty intense, but it's pretty cool. I really like that on this one that the director of photography, Bill Pope here, was actually directing lighting for the previs sets, so that the lighting on the live action set matched, and so that the lighting overall matches in the final. That's the way it should be done. And I am really excited about working that way. And we're going to talk more and more about the details. Sorry. It's too early for tea time, but I could probably use some. So this camera, let's talk about some of the live action capture. Now, 90% of this movie is CG, yet they still captured quite a bit of this with a stereo Alexa M rig. And this M rig is called the Cameron Pace Alexa M Smart Rig. I just took this from, I think FX Guide said this. So Cameron is clearly James Cameron, Avatar technology used. And Pace, I'm not sure, it's probably one of the designers. And it's an Alexa M rig. And it looks like there's two, I think they're using Panavision Primo lenses, I think they said on this one. So that's pretty cool. The whole thing's on a big Libra head with the big monster extensions for the Libra. Sometimes they're just little blue extensions. These are the big extensions. Whole thing's on a Super Techno crane, so it can just float around and get whatever they want. All this other stuff that's happening in the background, we're going to be looking at in depth about how a shoot like this goes down. So here's another picture of the Alexa M rig, and I want to just point your attention to right here. These are motion capture markers. And there's a reason they're there, and we'll be talking about that in a little bit. But here's someone slating to this massive camera. So, like I said, Bill Pope designed the lighting in 3D first. Now, Bill Pope is of the generation, and most of us are, where 3D was not the domain of the cinematographer. But he can still direct a 3D artist, especially a 3D artist that knows a little bit about real-world lighting. But what I'm pushing cinematographers to do now is to go to learncinedesign.com, which is my website, and start to learn to light in 3D. And when you become competent in it and you start to work on sets like this or just any set in general, Cinedesigner, which is my Cinema 4D plugin, is going to allow you to work with these kind of cameras and these kind of lights so that you can plan this type of execution. Or just a regular shoot, but on this type of shoot, I think it's even more important. But we see here, like, look how complex the lighting is. we have these, I'll make them orange. We have these sun hits coming through, and that's making dappled light. It's making sure that this light here matches the CG lighting that's going to happen later. And it's coming from a beautiful angle, and the lighting is being designed by Bill Pope, although executed partially in the computer and partially on set. So we have these hard, warm sunlight hits, as well as some complex ambient lighting that's happening above. And we have our Cameron Pace Alexa rig here. So a lot of real-world lighting actually has to go on here to make the lighting on Mowgli here interactive, and then make that stick with the overall design of the lighting and the cinematography, as well as just purely mechanical, making sure that the light's the same color, it's coming from the right direction. You just want to get all that stuff in line, and when that stuff lines up, when the real world lines up with the virtual, you just accept it as real. It's movie lighting is what they're calling it. They're like, it's not reality, it's not fully CG, it's the lighting that happens for that movie. I think that's a cool way of looking at it. So, this section's called Getting Dirty. So, what they did for this movie is they didn't limit themselves to being on big techno cranes or only floaty moves. There's a lot of rough handheld in there, and really interesting live camera work that gets captured and then used in the actual film. And this is one of those scenes. So you can see clearly here that the floor is real, because like this interaction is a little bit important. The lighting, for the most part, on him is going to be real. You can see the frame projected in the background. It's kind of cool. And then we see this handheld, and we see, again, the motion capture on there. So why is there motion capture there? We'll look at that in a little bit. And you can see a techno crane in the background with a Scorpio. They probably just leave that up there for when those shots come up. Here's another setup. They're clearly going into handheld. That's what I do with my glasses when I'm handheld too. That's how they've broken in the past. Again, with the motion capture markers on there as well. And this is a good shot. We're not going to talk about it just yet, but you can see here 20K or 10K bouncing into these white sheets, and we'll talk about that lighting in a little bit. But that's a good view of it. I don't think we get another view like that in some of the breakdown. Here's a techno crane. They're using real camera moves. That's the whole point of this, a lot of it. They're going to either recreate this type of movement, or they're going to use the actual live action capture plate. So handheld, Steadicam, techno crane on track. I have this exact techno crane in Cine Designer. This is a Chapman F3 head or G3 flight head. Good for stabilized moves, because this thing's going to be dollying and booming and doing all sorts of stuff. Really important, they called this essentially a glorified element shoot, which is kind of like if you're shooting an element, it's usually like a phone or some prop that's going to get comped in. But the element in this case is Mowgli himself. So things that he is directly interacting with, usually like the floor that they can build pretty easily, and this type of set, which is going to help dapple the lights so the shadows coming through make it feel interactive. And of course the rain is going to look pretty real. That's what's going on here. And I won't touch on this too much because this is not an animation breakdown, but they are bringing in Jim Henson puppet animators that are used to working with children and engaging them. And so these people are used to working with live action talent and having like conversations with them. And usually this puppet would make it into the final picture. It's not the case in this one. But what happens is that this actor actually has someone to riff off of, to actually have timing with. And they were saying that they were capturing real laughter because he would crack a joke or he would give a line in a funny way, and he would have a real interaction with them. And that's why the performance on this, I think, was so good, was that approach. It's not just a mechanical, like, oh, make sure he's looking in the right direction. It was an emotional responsibility to the actor to make sure that the actor actually is feeling what he should be feeling. So now we're going to move on to what's called Simulcam. And Simulcam is the reason you saw those motion capture markers on the cameras. What's happening is that they're going to take that camera. So when Bill Pope moves the camera, if it's handheld, Steadicam, tripod, techno crane, when it moves, they're able to track the position of that camera and the rotation of it. And what they do is they're going to take a virtual camera and put that exact same rotation and position onto a virtual camera, and they're going to just stick them on top of each other. So that when you're looking through the viewfinder, you not only see the live action set, you see the virtual set. Because again, they planned a lot of the sets out in previs, in pre-production. And Bill Pope was there to help with the layout. John, of course, was there to help lay out with making sure things are in the right place. He'd move trees around. And they would get a lot of that big mechanic stuff solved well beforehand, how the moves were going to be. But then on set, they would actually capture the performance of the camera and lay them together. So we're seeing this blurring of the line of what's computers, what's visual effects, what's the camera department, what's the G&E doing versus the CG lighting people. It's all blurring together, and we're not going from a linear pre-pro production to post pipeline, they already did like all this pre-pro and post in pre-production, and now you're on set, and it's this kind of cyclical type of workflow now. There's not just like you shoot it, goes to post, and you're done. You kind of are always doing that over and over again. It's like previs, shoot, post, previs, shoot, post. It's happening multiple times. So Simulcam is putting a CG camera on top of a virtual camera. And the system that they use, there's several. This is kind of like the one they use is called Photon, and I guess Digital Domain and Microsoft put it together. And it's a combination of technologies with traditional Motion Builder, which is for motion capture, and the Unity game engine. And I just wanted to quickly show you guys what that is. So you can look it up. Motion Builder, industry standard for motion capture. So people in the gray suits, if you want to capture that action or there's cameras, this is how you capture it. But it's not really very good for rendering, but which is the reason that Autodesk bought, I won't say the name of the engine, but they came out with Stingray, their game engine, because most people are using this Motion Builder, but then they're going to Unity. And Unity is a pretty cool game engine. I've written a couple things for it. I've brought Cinedesigner into Unity a little bit. Other people use Unreal. But now Autodesk has something called, is it Brickyard? I think Brickyard's Amazon's game engine. Everyone's got a game engine. Oh no, Autodesk is Stingray. So there's a bunch of game engines. So you basically, I'll just show you. Enough looking at slides. What you get is over here is the live action monitor. So there's a live action person with this camera move that's basically pushing in. That's what that Technical shot was from. And then you see these stand-ins, these blue people here with an aux. And then when you're on set, you actually see the camera moving, and it live tracks this CG background onto it. So when you're looking through it, you actually kind of see what you're going to look at in the end. So you can check your horizon. You can use your intuition on set to work like you would in the real world. It's like being on the holodeck in Star Wars or Star Trek. And here's the virtual wildebeest or whatever this is. So this actually crosses his frame as the camera's moving through. So they've timed this up so that this times up with that. And so the director and the DP, the lighting, everything is getting to be a little bit more like reality. If you only looked at this monitor, you'd almost feel like you were on set. And The Lion King or The Jungle Book, you actually feel like you were on location. That's what I meant to say. So things get complicated with this, right? So we have a camera here, another live action camera. Then we have the comp view, a comp view, and a live action. And this is John directing into a microphone because, these guys are busy up here. So he directs into a PA system. So here's our virtual production setup. This is Simulcam. This is where you can move the camera handheld. You can move it on a crane, Steadicam, whatever you want. And you can see what the background is going to look like. It'll track with it. You can move the camera around virtual objects and you can look at it. So this is kind of like Avatar 2.0. This is stuff that happened on Life of Pi. This is stuff that happened on Gravity. And it sure as hell happened on Jungle Book. And I've been hanging out with these people quite a bit. People that do this type of work. I've been learning about this because commercials have been doing this type of stuff for a little bit as well. And that's where the idea for Cinedesigner came in, is that DPs really need a tool set to be able to communicate and thrive and live in this new type of virtual production world. We pretty much have our hands tied, or we did until Cinedesigner came out, where we had to rely 100% on the CG crew doing everything. They did the previs, they did all the tech planning. Well, now Cinedesigner, which is at cinedesigner.com, sorry to plug it, but it just makes so much sense in this context. That's for the DPs to plan now. Bill Pope with it, if he took the time to learn it, he could be doing his own lighting comps. They could send him the assets and he could do the lighting comp. That's the power of it. And this is why movies like this really call for a Cinedesigner and that type of thing. So here's a close-up on that same thing. This is pretty cool. So why go through all this trouble to match CG and real on the same time? So I talked about the camera moves, but I'm also going to talk about the lighting. So this, you can see, is the practical set. And we see Mowgli here with this little torch object. And we see this backlight coming from the blue world. And here's what they see on set. Look how amazing that is. They see the extension. So this is the real world, and this is like the horizon and a sky with stars, and you see the torch. And when you have that, you can make decisions like this torch. How bright should it be? How much should it flicker? How much is it going to interact? This CG torch, pretty much like the lightsabers in Star Wars during their blue screen battle on the bridge, you make on-set lighting decisions that are good good cinematography decisions because you can see the environment around it. If I was just looking at this frame, I'm like, I don't know what's going on. Should it be bright? Should it be dimmer? Is it daytime? Is it nighttime with the torch? Like, is he coming out of a cave? You get to look at this, and now you can make confident decisions about the lighting on set so that everything matches better. So you don't have bad CG and bad green screen. Now the filmmakers, the DP, the director, they're able to be more interactive like they were on set or on location. And you get final plates like this, where everything kind of matches. It's like, okay, we know that this torch here is fire and it's lighting him, which it's actually kind of doing on set, but then it's also lighting the background in the same way. And you would have known this already on set. Bill and his CG artist, I wish I knew the name of the CG artist that worked with Bill. That would be a fascinating interview. A CG artist who was lighting with Bill on 3D. Though I feel like I know what that conversation actually went like. We knew this. He knew what the lighting was going to be like. He designed this cinematography. Someone else executed it, whether it was the live action crew or the virtual crew. This is virtual production. This is the reality of what things are going to be looking like in the future. / right now. This is not everyone's reality right now, but I know more and more people working on sets like this. It's becoming more and more common. So we're going to take our break. This episode's feeling a tiny bit short already. Don't usually get to the break this fast, but maybe I'll drink tea for 20 minutes. That'll make up for it. So what I'm going to do now is after the break, we're going to look at the stage a little bit more closely and break that down. Then we're going to look at a water tank, look at some of the process, so some of the before and after kind of shots, and then some of the high-level cinematography. But for the break today, what we're going to do is we're going to go into Cinema 4D, and we are going to look at the virtual stage in 3D first. Now, I built this in Cinema 4D using Cine Designer. Not all this stuff is Cine Designer stuff. Some of it I just built myself, but we're going to break down what this stage looks like bit by bit, and why, if you're doing a shoot like this, being able to plan like this is very important. So I'm going to start to take away some stuff here, just to make this a little bit easier to see. So this is their stage. I believe they said it was 60 by 80, so that's how big it is. The entire thing, if you can see from here, is wrapped in blue screen. Now, it's blue screen in 360, but I only did partial so that you could actually see into it. And we can look at this from an overhead or elevation view. So here's the overhead of that set, very much like a 2D CAD program. And you can plan it in the same way. Now, the blue screen is for obvious reasons, so that you can have blue screen no matter where you look. You're not just going to have to move them around locally. What's happening next is this curtain. Now, we're going to look at live action pictures of this too, but I wanted to break it down in 3D here. This white shape here represents white curtains that go around the entire set. And we saw before that they were bouncing lights into it. So this essentially becomes one big light source. So instead of moving a 20 by around and then hitting it, you just surround the entire set with whites. And you can bounce into it whenever you want to. You want it to be a little bit over there, you just pull the curtain around. It's for fast setups. Above for overhead lighting, these are essentially space lights, but they're cubes. And what happens is they're going to put teasers up. So as we look up at them, the gaffer is able to control these wirelessly and selectively add fill from above wherever they need. So if they only want it from the back, if they want it all over, if they only want it from the side, they can control that and it doesn't spill into each other. So this is essentially like a big chimera with a grid on it, except in the sky. And that's a pretty typical execution. And the gaffer did have access to a 3D lighting chart where he could design the lighting with Bill, actually. So similar to this. And it would be interesting in the future. I'm not sure how much I'm going to dig into this to be able to actually control sets like this from Cine Designer. It's something I've talked to a couple people about making it happen. It's a certain direction for the software if I want to go into that level of stuff. So I'm going to hide the teasers again. Just remember that they're there just because they're kind of in the way. We have these big, I put them as softboxes. I actually think they were just actually bigger cube lights like this. But these are essentially very focused frontal or backlights. Then we have the regular floor units, so they'd have 18Ks or 20Ks and big hard light sources to like recreate the sun, and then a little bit stuff on the floor, like another 12K bounced into both of these to add a little bit of fill and wrap from a direction. And that is the majority of how this is actually being lit. What else did I take off here? So we have the cyc lights. So I think they're using LEDs on this one. It's becoming more and more common. They have these essentially box LED lights all around, and that's when they need to light the blue screen up. So whenever they want, they can expose some blue screen by moving the curtains. They're already pre-lit. They have the ambient. Essentially, there's going to be a couple specific things that have to change, but a lot of the lighting doesn't require any rigging. All the lights get rigged up, and it's all about dimming and just working with what you have. And it allows you to move really quickly and have basically, you want to build all the lighting scenarios possible into one hang, essentially, so you can move really fast. What else do we have going on here? The last thing I'm going to call out, before we do those, is that when you work in a stage like this, you don't psych the floor. It's just not worth it. You usually build the set up in the air so that if you're doing an angle like this, you don't see that transition line. And if you do, you put up these blue flats or green flats or whatever, and they block the horizon line. So you see here how there's a transition. You wouldn't want that. With those panels there, you wouldn't see it. So you're going to see those a lot. And they actually have a light on the floor per panel I was seeing. And the decision to go chroma blue for or digi blue, I can't tell if it's chroma or digi, was because the reason they went blue is because so much of the final is going to have green in it. So with a lot of green props, blue props on set, I think blue makes the most sense because you can then have a lot of leaves and you can still attempt to roto it out. The last thing I'm going to show here, which is going to be a part of Cinedesigner eventually, is I'm going to build something for VFX supervisors that can quickly add things like this. Now these are very gross, ugly looking stand-ins, but you'll see that they're very accurately placed. Each one of these purple spheres represents a motion capture camera. So there's, like I said, to be able to track the position of the camera and some of the actors and sets, you have to have these witness cameras essentially shooting light at them, and they're able to triangulate where things are as they move around. So we had these towers. So you can imagine on a set this big, that planning like this has to happen. You don't just show up and wing this. It has to be all designed, and you want to be able to be like, well, if I need the techno crane there, I'm going to make sure that the lights are there, and you're able to just plan beforehand where everything is going to go. And with Cinedesigner, you can start to do this type of planning right now, today. They are actually doing very similar types of planning. The third floor worked on this. Digital Domain clearly has their own previs software. A lot of the big studios have in-house software like this, but I've made it available to you for cinematographers, for directors, for anyone that needs to start to work like this. And as you learn 3D, to close out our tea time here, you will become more and more comfortable with it. It'll start to be like working in the real world. You start to understand the relationship between the real world and 3D, and you will be in a very good place moving forward because this is the direction of most cinematography for big feature films, is moving directly into this type of workflow. Oh man, this breakdown compared to my last one, which what did we do last time? Her? This is nerdier. This is way more what I'm used to talking about because this is what I do for a living, and it's the tool set that I've been building. But I had fun doing the high-level breakdowns. But for the people that met me on the high-level breakdown and they're watching this, I do work in the industry a bit. I'm not Bill Pope level, like we said on the podcast, but I do have some on-set time. I'll say that much. That kind of came off as a kind of a jerk comment, but I didn't mean it that way. So here's our set. Here's how I modeled that stage. Here's the big T's with the motion capture control, or motion capture cameras. Here's the space lights up in the air. And like I said, the entire set surrounded with blue. And then a lot of the set surrounded by this white curtain, and they're bouncing 12Ks into it. LEDs on the floor to light these panels. LEDs up here to light the blue screen when they're shooting the blue screen. And these are ambient lights that can be dialed up and down as needed to add ambient from the top. Very cool. It's kind of like one lighting setup and you just dim it around. And there's some special builds that happen too, but that is a virtual production set. This is a pretty big one. It's pretty cool. This is a friend of mine, Girish, and I might still be doing an interview with him and the virtual production team from Jungle Book. We're trying to get clearances from Disney, but I got impatient and I wanted to make this video because it's so cool. I wanted to get it out there. Girish, and I forget his name. It's in the interview. He is the virtual camera layout TD. That's sort of the name. These two are essentially running the virtual set. So we have our real set here, but who actually puts together the virtual set? So moves around the assets in the virtual world. That's these two guys. So a lot of the lighting that's happening in the virtual world is being controlled by them, and a lot of the art department placement is happening from them. So they're kind of like the virtual art department and the virtual lighting department. And you'll see that there's only one of each on a movie this big. That's what technology allows for. So these are kind of your virtual crew, essentially. So you're the DP, but these are the people that are going to be executing it for you on set on the virtual. And you need to get the virtual right, you need to get the pre-production right, or else the final image will suffer. It won't match, it won't look good. So we're going to look at a couple more shots of the stage and break these down. Like I said before, we do have T12s, 12Ks, and they're all coming from the same angle because they're supposed to feel like the sun coming through trees. And we see that they went through a lot of effort to make these blue trees so that the light coming through them when it hits him is dappled like light coming through leaves. That would be very difficult to do any other way. Like I said, here are the blue flats. I call them like footers. They're kind of like floor molding for a house, and just make sure you don't see the transition behind it. And then the stands that these lights are on are being covered in blue, so you don't see them. And then they're each being cut off from each other with these solids, as are the space lights up here. These are big. They're bigger than I thought they were. Maybe they're 8x5. Looks like there's Luma panels in there by these by the bulb shapes here. And so those are just going to add fill light from that direction. And then what's cool is that they went out of their way to use this electric car plus a handheld camera. So they're getting 2 angles at once. Both are having their position and rotation tracked, and they're doing real camera moves with real people. So it makes it so that it makes it feel more realistic. So this is something that actually could have happened, even though the execution in the end is very CG. For the lighting, they did a lot of amazing things to make the lighting interactive. If you watch the video of this, this is actually a projector, and there's light changing. This is constantly changing and animating. The VFX department actually made the animations for the light. So this light source is just blinking and changing. It's making it look like things are happening in the lighting. We see this high angle up here, a couple witness cameras, a bounce again into the 12 by here, another bounce here. The backlights are on, the ambience are on. We've got our mud path here. So pretty cool stuff. So there's still a lot of live action lighting happening. It's just all about facilitating the final image being good. It's not like you're lighting the whole set. You're really doing some interesting hybrid where you design the lighting in 3D first. Design the lighting in 3D first, and then you work with the VFX team and the Tech Viz team to make sure that the set gets built the same way that you need to. So you build the set in 3D, or the art department builds it in 3D, and then they have to basically recreate certain parts in reality. And you have to recreate certain parts of the lighting and the camera work in reality. So you're a piece of the pipeline now. You're not as big a piece as it used to be. This is pretty cool. This is a turntable. This is a big circular thing. You can see it here. And the whole thing is spinning. So he's able to just continuously be walking and walking and walking. So you can stay here. So instead of having be a treadmill, which would be flat, they actually have bumps built into it. So it makes the terrain seem like he's actually moving up and down. So that's pretty cool. We'll see up here that they talked about this in the breakdown. There's moving lights, and this is the sun. And these are actually, you can basically program the gobos. So the shadows that are in it, they're programming gobos into it. So it makes it seem like he's moving through leaves. So they're able to like put movement into the lighting. It's really quite cool. And it's using pretty much like all of technology and all of lighting to make this happen. And on top of that, we have this big 40 by 40 source that has like warm 12K is pushed into it, 12K tungsten lights, big warm light source from over here, and some more warm front fill. And probably like, oh yeah, and then these hard backlights are happening at the same time. Really high level stuff. This is a look at, I would believe, this headset. I've used this headset a bunch. Basically means you're controlling a technocrane usually, or like you can basically just start talking and it will auto cancel the background. So on a big noisy set, you can still talk to the jib operator, the crane operator, and be like, okay, we're gonna boom up, we're booming up, and I'm tilting down, so he can communicate. And again, instead of looking at this camera, where it's like, oh, this blue stuff, the jibber operator, the head operator actually is looking at the virtual set. So to them, it's like this, it's like you're on set and you have all the same cues that you would have by being in the real world. You get this virtual preview of it. And that's really cool. And I can't talk about something with Cine Designer, but that's something that would be cool to do in Cine Designer too, wouldn't it? Wouldn't it? So here's a shot of the tank, this water scene. Again, this is all CG and it's beautiful and it's amazing. And it would have been very difficult to control this on set in the real world. Really difficult, kind of impossible. So I thought this is a cool play. This is going to start kind of our process of looking at the final and what they shot practically, the final, what they shot practically. We're going to kind of tear into that right now. It's always fun to look at. So here's the water tank that they shot with. You see that they're on a hydroscope. I actually found a picture of the crane with the blue housing that they used the hydroscope with. I just can't find it anymore. So here's that blue water tank that's completely surrounded with blue, being lit by, I guess, the real world, and probably like an 18K, I would guess, like up here to add some hard light. But that's the bit that makes it in there, though I think a lot of this ends up being CG Mowgli as well. Here's a final shot. Again, the backgrounds are beautiful. The way that the lenses are being recreated, so they did actually try to recreate the lenses that Bill Pope dictated. I'm going to take another sip real quick. They said they did multiple blind testings of cameras and lenses, and they consistently picked the Alexa with Panavision Primos. Can't be mad at that. I've shot a couple commercials with them. It's amazing. I don't know as much about them as much as they do. I think I probably wouldn't blind test pick them out, but I know about them. I've used them. They're really nice. And in CG, they mapped those lenses, and then the way that these are going out of focus, the focal lengths that he was choosing, the distances, those were all respected in CG. So he was making these high-level cinematography decisions that would normally get executed on set, except they're being executed virtually now. So this is like a virtual Panavision Primo, the way they flare, the way that they go out of focus. You'll see when I start doing some of the high-level breakdowns at the end, these are virtual Primo lenses. You can map the characteristics of Primos, how they flare. All that organic stuff that seems like intangible can be mapped and recreated later. It's possible. It's done. It's happening here. Here's the what was actually shot, you know. Really, we're just going for you and your performance. That's all we really need here. And then the interaction with the actual bear is cool. I think the bear was actually motorized so it would move, so he's not just sitting on like a flat thing. It was pretty amazing. And then just look at the lighting here. This blowout. Rob Legato talks about intentionally blowing it out like it would happen in the real world, yet still containing, you know, quite a bit of, you know, niceness in their fat exposure. And then the lighting, which is basically bounce bear lighting. It's like, you know, off the bear. And look how this is blowing out. Look at how the depth of field works. This depth of field is meant to look like a Panavision Primo. And it's gorgeous. And it's flaring like a Panavision Primo. But with control and finesse. So like when you get a lens for in reality, you're just like, well, that's what the lens for looks like. And this one, you have control over it. Bill Pope talks about this as we move on to our process plates, that after this experience, like he considers this pure cinematography. Live action is live action. Pure CG is CG, but this is a pure aesthetic cinematography where like you make decisions really on high level based on what you want it to be like, not based on the constraints of reality. They could make this exactly like the real world. They could simulate that, and we do a lot to do that because a lot of the real world is really good, but there's certain things about the real world that are not so good that really hurt the end product. And those things you can basically get around them or come with new solutions in CG. So Bill Pope said it, not me. Bill Pope said it. I'm just quoting it. I believe it, but I'm just quoting. I don't have the final shot for this, but you can see that, again, the 12Ks making dappled light with haze in here, going through these leaves so that the light pattern that hits him feels real. And we have a guy just running after him like they were in the forest, you know, and they use this kind of camera move for the final one. So it feels as he's like running through the forest, you're right behind him. He's probably running on like a CG tree too, so you couldn't do this in real life. You can't like chase someone on a CG tree 100 feet in the air. It's just not going to work out. So CG filmmaking, man. Virtual production. Here's a live plate, and we have Bagheera here. Again, a Jim Henson animator holding that down so he has something to interact with. You can look at some of the lighting. Again, some more trees to dapple the light. This is like a branch casting a big shadow with a partial tree in there. Here's the final, no, not the final. This is the on-set preview of it. So when you're on set operating the camera and lighting, you're looking at this, and you're lighting the virtual set and the real set at the same time. It's a lot of fun. I love this. This is why DPs need to start moving into 3D so that you can really be part of this process. Again, if you think this isn't coming for you, if this isn't the way that things are going to be made, it's only for the big movies. I know. I've been working on somewhat medium-sized commercials. This pipeline is coming for you. It might come all the way down to the very, very most indie features, and you better be ready for it because it's coming fast and hard. And hey, you don't have to work like this. You can, like I said, you can ride or die the old school system, and you'll probably be working and doing lots of great content, but you will be limiting your potential to work on this type of projects if you're not understanding 3D well enough. Here is the onset behind the scenes where he's being carried by a bunch of monkeys, clearly a bunch of guys in blue suits. I still like that the trees are here, the lens decision still being respected. And then here's the CG plates. Not exactly from that shot, actually. I think a lot of this is probably CG Mowgli because, I mean, he's upside down. But it is a mix of those sort of things. And look at the lighting and the lens and the motion blur and all that stuff. It's done aesthetically from a high-level reason. It's cool. Here's one of those shots where, again, he's like, I think he's escaping Shere Khan, and he's running through this kind of ditch. And so here's our stand-ins of the animals so that he has some timing and the real camera move and the lighting from those big panels before. And here's the final shot. Pretty amazing, especially because this whole thing is moving, and if the CG real animals are like interacting with them, it's phenomenal. So here's, I think, the last breakdown. Oh, I'm missing a frame. I think I'm missing a frame from this. How did that happen? Let me see if I can find it. I lost the frame from it. I had the final. I must have deleted it by accident. Well, sorry. Well, here's a shot of Mowgli walking and the technocranes pulling back with him. Very realistic distances. Here's our animator. And then here is the onset preview where you would see the CG Bagheera. So the operator knows where to put the head. They understand how composition works. So you can make actual composition decisions on set and not just be working in pure blue. So that is our look at the synthesis. We're not done. We're going to go into just a quick high-level look. I'm not going to go frame by frame and look at the narrative and do any high-level breakdown on that level. We're going to look at just some of the final frames and look at the cinematography of it. And then even though, because it's basically all CG in a lot of these, it's still amazing cinematography. And we're going to talk about that. Sorry, I said talk about that 10 times. So, the sky blown out, very realistic. Shere Khan in full silhouette here. These lens flares, very accurate for where the sun is. If you're going to shoot this in reality, you'd have to wait until like a certain 30-minute window of the day to get it. It would be hard to do this and hold the exposure of the animals and get this shot. This is movie lighting. This is probably not realistic. You probably couldn't get this exact exposure in reality. Though the sky, they let it clip pretty well. Getting all these animals, it's just not going to happen. This is the way to capture movie lighting, is like this, is CG. And there is CG. There are real-world, high-level cinematography decisions to be made here, is to put the sun there, putting the camera angle here, looking at how the horizon's working and putting him up there in this frame. And the lighting on the rocks and the angle, it's all cinematography. It's just in the computer when you're executing it. This, again, probably 100% CG. Maybe he's real, the performance. But the camera move, it's this camera move tracking. This way, the haze, the perspective, the composition, the art department, the virtual art departments, putting the trees where they are and building this stuff out, it's beautiful. You know, some movies, they build it up for real and you actually shoot it with real light. Other ones, you do them virtual like this, and they're both the same craft, the same final image to the audience. Just an amazing shot here. Same forest scene. This integration of Mowgli with Baloo the bear in this CG forest is mind-blowing. I thought they might have shot this on like a partially real lake. It's just all CG and it's so beautiful. It just makes me understand more and more where we're going and how much control over you have the process. Here's a fake bokeh, like there was water on the lens, and the way that this is out of focus here, Panavision Primo focus, man. The flare, it's beautiful. This scene, the performance from Baloo is hilarious and beautiful and sad. It's amazing. And the lighting in this cave, I love it. You know, someone had to design this lighting, you know, to come through here. The subsurface scattering happening on the honeycombs, you know, the composition, this cave, this like circle that gets made here. The whole thing is beautiful. The blocking of the scene. This is the director. He's like, you know, Baloo's going to be facing away from us here. You know what I mean? These are all real world directing and cinematography decisions. And Bill is actually designing the fact that the lighting is coming through. He's doing that. And instead of it being a 20K outside of the cave, it's going to be a virtual spotlight or virtual area light. You know, in the end, it's the same decision. It's the same impact on the audience, real or not. Just beautiful recreation of depth of field here with his eyelid out of focus, the hair here out of focus, and the nose. You know, this is a beautiful CG character and a beautiful render. Really great lighting on Baloo character. Amazing. Some kind of Godfather lighting happening here. If you know the movie The Godfather, this character is kind of like making kind of reference to that here. The fact that he's in partial shadow, you know, we're not talking about bright CG kids movies that we see every day, though those are really good too, like Zootopia and that sort of thing. But it's dark, kind of like mature cinematography lighting. He's poking out of it. And he has the highlights, like I've said before, with dark scenes, you got to throw the highlights in there. So these are big high-level cinematography decisions just being executed in CG. And you sure as hell get the feels when you're watching a movie like this. You know, like this scene here, if I talked about it too long, it would turn into tears for me, man. You know, like the interaction between these two characters, the performance, the cinematography of it, the way that it's being lit, it's all there. Real CG, it's all there. This is virtual production at its highest level. This is Avatar 4.0 evolved. This is one of the best movies of this category. And I hate to say like of this category. It's a really great movie, But I do want to make the point, because I think a lot of people would easily dismiss this as a CG movie like Gravity, like Life of Pi. This is cinematography. That is why they were winning best cinematography for those movies, is because it's this new generation and breed of cinematography that's happening. So that's The Jungle Book. Very tech breakdown style. It perfectly, I think, illustrates the point of why DPs need to work in 3D, at least need to start understanding it. You know, if you feel like you're too far in your career and this isn't for you, that's completely fine. You know, but I really try to put this message out there, and the reason I make Cinedesigner so affordable, believe it or not, Cinedesigner is priced incredibly affordably compared to what it could be if I went enterprise or business to business with a solution, is that I really want cinematographers who work in the real world to bring what they know into the new generation of filmmaking, into modern cinematography, into what Yuri calls from GCI expanded cinematography. We need to be in this space. There's so much that can be done here. There's things that can't be done in reality. And I know that for a lot of people, that's like, oh, that's why I don't like CG. That's because we haven't had mature directors and filmmakers working in it yet. But we're getting the tools. People like Rob Legato, people like myself, I'm not comparing myself to Rob Legato, but we are trying to build tools that bring the human filmmaking that you have inside of you from your experiences into the computer to be enhanced. That's all. It's another tool. That's all we're trying to get done. I think we're starting to see that. I think that this type of filmmaking is huge. This is where I want to be. I want to direct and DP or just direct the live action Naruto movie. This is the only way you could ever make a world like Konoha, or the big scale fights, and not have them look ridiculous. Have them be grounded in reality. Shoot them like a real movie, but have it be the execution being helped out by the computer. I would love to have Gary Roberts, that have that team capable of this and be able to drive from my pure imagination and everything that I would ever want to happen, execute it, the real stuff in reality, but then have everything else be executed in the computer. Because these days, look at this, you know, like I want a virtual anamorphic lens. We can make it look like it's anamorphic. I don't need to actually shoot with anamorphics and have the issues with the focus, issues with the lighting, with the distortion. I can add that stuff selectively back later. This is modern cinematography, expanded cinematography, virtual production. This is the way that the industry is moving. And if you're interested in getting in and you're not in the industry in these zones, mostly Los Angeles is one of the only places this is really happening, I really encourage you to check out cinedesigner.com. This is a way that you can take real-world filmmaking knowledge and start to bring it into the computer. You can plan your real-world shoots with it now. You're going to get really good results by planning live-action shoots in CG, but it's also going to be a bridge for you if you intend to move into this space. Learn live-action photography, live-action cinematography first. Get to know that. Shoot a whole feature. Shoot many features. Shoot music videos and commercials, all live action. Then remember that and start to transition it into where we're all going in the future of filmmaking. So that's my look at The Jungle Book. A little bit different than the breakdown of her, huh? A little bit different. I'm not sure which one I like better. You guys tell me. I'm open for it, but this is something, this is my core. This is me looking at this gear, extrapolating it into the future. Like you saw in Cinedesigner, I see a set like this and I'm like, well, it's time to start modeling and starting to put this all into Cinedesigner. All these tools will be here so you can plan, so you can do virtual cinematography and live action cinematography. Love this movie. I hope I can actually interview the team. We're going through the official channels, so Disney has to do all the approvals. That's kind of tricky. Thanks so much for watching, guys. I'll see you on the next one. Bye.